Today we are going to talk about the crash of American Airlines Flight 965 in Cali, Colombia. We are going to cover how it happened, what the results of it were, and how the lack of English proficiency played a role. Who was involved in the crash? Well, only one aircraft was involved. The plane contained the pilots, crew, and passengers, and the accident was later investigated by two parties. The pilots were Captain Nicholas Teferi, who was 57 and had just over 13,000 flying hours, and the first officer, Donald Williams, who was 39 and had just under 6,000 flying hours. The crew and flight attendants, who had all been of Colombian descent, were Magdalena Barrero, Rosa Calaperro, Tariso Delgado, Gilberto Restrepo, Margaret Velbros. Along with the flight personnel, there were 156 people on board, and only 4 survived. Both the Aeronáutica Civil República de Colombia and the NTSB would later investigate the crash. The plane involved was a 757-223, which was powered by 2 Rolls-Royce engines. It crashed into the side of a mountain. This crash marked the first U.S.-owned 757 crash, as well as the highest death toll crash for all of Colombia at this time. The image here is a picture of the aftermath of the crash. The crash happened in December of 1995, and the reports were published later in 1996. The plane took off in Miami, Florida, and headed for Cali, Colombia. Unfortunately, as I will get into shortly, a communication mishap caused the crash to happen in a mountain range in Bogota, near Buga, Colombia. Here is Cali, here's Bogota, where the crash happened. Why did the accident happen? After a 34-minute delay in Miami, the takeoff point, the pilots were already in a rush. The pilots were originally supposed to go around Cali and approach from the opposite side. Upon radio communications, the pilots were given clearance to approach Cali runway 19 or 19, directly by way of Razo, so they had to go through Razo. Unfortunately, they had been too high on the approach and needed an immediate altitude adjustment and descent. How did a more direct approach lead to a crash off the flight path? Well, the pilots originally entered only R into their flight maintenance computer, or their FMC. Unfortunately for the pilots, the computer found the first R alphabetically, which was Romeo, not Razo. They never double-checked either. This turned their plane headed away from Cali and toward the mountain range where they would later crash. As the pilots were unfamiliar with the terrain, they relied on their navigation aids, or their nav aids, and being that they had not been given an ample warning, the ground proximity issued a warning, and the pilots were just barely unable to clear the mountain. So as you can see by this image here, the plane came in this way, and they were originally supposed to go down and around Cali and land on this side. However, with the clearance through Razo, they were able to come through directly here. Unfortunately, they had only entered R and headed towards Romeo by the time they found out they could not clear this mountain here. Why did the lack of English proficiency contribute to the accident? The controller himself spoke very poor English. He was not up to ICAO, or the International Civil Aviation Organization, Level 4 language proficiency, according to their standards and recommended practices based on their rating scale. The controller had stated that had the pilot spoken Spanish, he would have warned them. He would have tried to convey the upcoming terrain, or the mountains that he knew were there, and they did not. However, he had tried by asking repeatedly for their position. Had they been at ICAO Level 4, this may not have happened. The only other contributing factor English played was only typing R into their FMC, not ROZ. As a result of this accident, airlines became required to provide pilots with CRM or flight training to recognize when the FMC becomes an obstacle. The requirement of FMS-equipped aircraft to modify logic and retain fixes between the airplane and its destination to avoid the deviation from the flight path became required. The implementation of standards for portrayal of terminal environment info on the FMS EFIS, the requirement of navigation charts to display terrain, and the encouraging of manufacturers to develop ways to show terrain info on flight displays. The development of mandatory CFIT training programs to show the successful wind shear rejected takeoff training programs. To alert pilots to FMS hazards of commonly identified navigation stations for outside the U.S., and to warn them of becoming too reliant on automation. And lastly, the requirement was to encourage pilots in ATC to strictly adhere to ICAO standards and phraseologies and terminology in all situations. These are a few of the references in case you would like to learn more about this crash and its outcomes. Thanks for watching.